Welcome to Documentary First, an inside look at a first-time filmmaker's journey. I'm your host, Josh Lindsay from the Movie Proposal Podcast. And with me is our first-time filmmaker, Christian Taylor.
Hello there.
Hello. It's been a long time.
I know. So nice to see you.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
And our trusty-dusty research extraordinaire, audio,
Guru?
not visual, but guru guy, Jason Rugg.
Hey there.
Hey, Jason.
Hi.
A man of many words. All right, so today we are seeing Christian for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, I think the last time I was here, it was like the middle of May.
Middle of May, and as of this recording, we're in the middle of July. So a lot has happened. So let's do this. Let's do a quick recap. When last we spoke, you had just gotten back from Tennessee, doing some editing, rewriting, and then you left us to go to France. So give us a recap before we jump into France.
So, just to recap, and if you're tuning in this week, the past 2 weeks, I gave little mini updates since I've been back from France, but not a ton. And then I went on vacation. And so this is really our first time back as a team. This is the first time really we're going to talk about what happened in the actual production. So when I last saw you, we had gotten back from Tennessee. We had rewritten the script. We had laid out the assembly edit. I came back to Chicago. We refined the edit. The composer, Jeff Kurtenacker, was working on the score. Then Jason Hoban was our post-production sound guy. He then, at the very last minute, put everything together. So I think the people that have one of the toughest jobs in a film is the sound crew, because the post-production sound team always seems to get dumped on, in my experience, where the deadline is fast approaching. They can't do anything until the film is completely locked, the score is completely done, then they can do their work. Sound effects, sound mixing, the works.
So for a feature-length film, how much time did they have to do their job?
Oh, my word. They really had... Jason probably had a week. And, that was truly like the last week. What we tried to do to get him prepared, we did this for Jason and for Jeff. It was not the way it should be done, but we knew we were on such a bad time deadline. When we would finish an act, we would pass it off to those guys so they would hear it, listen to it, begin to work on it. So we did that in one act increments. There are 4 acts in our film. And so it makes it challenging because then you have to put the whole thing together. And It actually came back and bit us in the butt a little bit in France, because Jeff ended up scoring the whole film as one whole film, and he was able to put that together after he'd worked on the acts. Jason had a challenging time because it threw off time codes and things like that. So to get everything synced back up was really hard for him, and he had very little time. And so things were just a tad bit off in the way, with the score and the rest of the film.
Okay. But that was for when you were over in France screening the film.
Yeah. And I think whenever I've told people from the time that I started rewriting the script to we were screening in Normandy, it was 12 weeks. And the film is almost 2 hours long. Like, they're like, that's not possible. And it truthfully isn't possible. Like, I don't know. I was stunned, frankly, that we had anything to show at all, much less anything that profoundly impacted people like it did. So, and that is a complete testament to my team. We have an amazing team, largely made up of volunteers, and they worked their tails off to try to get something done so we could show it in Normandy.
So if I understand correctly, in the 11th hour, they were handing off the actual film to you as you were walking on a plane or something to that effect?
I was getting in the car to go to the airport when Richard Arbazani, we call him Rick, when Rick Arbazani delivered a flash drive in my hand that had the film on it.
That sounds like its own little film.
It is. It is. And it really was the 11th hour. And I mean, it was worse than that. And then, this will be a story for another time, I didn't even use it.
Oh. So did they watch something in France when you flew over there?
Did you just
They
act it
did.
out?
Yeah,
I acted out the whole film on stage all by
live
myself.
storytelling by Christian Taylor.
Yeah.
Not what they expected. All right, so shall we jump into France then?
Yeah, let's jump into France.
So you flew to France. It's the anniversary of D-Day. There's screenings planned. I mean, you are with the girl who wore freedom. So tell us about your adventures in France.
So I went over there on May 21st. I flew over just with my husband. And we were staying in the town of Carentan. If you don't know what Carentan is or where it is, look it up on a map. It was a important, critical Allied objective. It sat in between Omaha Beach and Utah Beach. And in order to bring all of the Allied forces together to push together to get Cherbourg, the port of Cherbourg, which is the deep water port that was the first major objective of the Allies, they needed to go straight through Carentan. And there was a big German resistance in that town. So that is where I stayed. Super historic town, right near the downtown called the Place de République, and where the Silver Star ceremony on June 12th was held. Look that up. That's a super cool. There's video online about that. So I stayed there, and I stayed in this tiny little studio apartment that would become my home for a month. It was owned by Jean-Marie Caillat and his wife Sylvie, who are cast members of ours, and several of our other team members. There was a little complex. Their dad used to have a woodworking studio in the back of their boyhood home, and they turned it into these little studio apartments. I highly recommend staying there. It's on Airbnb. Anyway, so we ended up there. That was May 21st. I think I had 3 or 4 days to make sure that everything was ready for our first screening. Our first screening was held at the Utah Beach Museum. Because the Utah Beach people have been our biggest champions. They have helped us an incredible amount from, helping us get archival footage and photos, history, timelines, just about anything we ever needed. We filmed in their space. They were our largest production partner in France. So not to mention Charles de Vallevier, who was sort of I don't even know what they call him, but his father founded the Utah Beach Museum, Michel de Vallevier. He's in our film. And then now he sort of oversees that. He's the assistant mayor of Sainte-Marie-du-Mont, where the Utah Beach Museum is. So without Charles de Vallevier, none of this would have happened because he was the first French person that signed on, and he's a very important guy in that whole Normandy world. So that was the first place we screened it. Plus, that's where the dress is. So Danny had donated her first dress to the Utah Beach Museum. And of course, I think that was only right that we showed it there.
So earlier you mentioned the flash drive that was handed off to you of the actual movie was not used in France.
Correct.
So what did they screen at the museum?
So what happened was, thankfully, I went over early and I did the test before my editor, Bill, left. So he was able to help me. When I got over there, I discovered that the flash drive that they gave me wouldn't work. We thought it was just maybe the Utah Beach system, but it didn't work anywhere. It didn't work in any of the museums or theaters that we were at. So basically, everything on that drive was not usable.
So were you having a heart attack at this point?
Oh, are you kidding? I was freaking out. The other thing that we discovered is there were challenges with the film, so I did not get to look at it before it was like mastered. So I didn't get to look at what was going on with the color. I didn't get to look and check and make sure the film was correct before I was to show it. And I couldn't because it was all on this little flash drive that I couldn't play and hadn't had time. So Bill had looked at it and said, you need to really look at the color and you need to look at. So once we finally did, the color was really off. It wasn't consistent. It was way too dark. It wouldn't have been what I would have done. And there were things that I guess got accidentally changed or something, fonts that weren't what I had chosen. And there were images that were left out, not included. And a lot of that, I'm sure, happened because we were rushing at the end. And so the film just wasn't right. It wasn't what I handed off.
But how did you see the film?
So Bill screened it first, like in the United States.
Okay.
So he had a version of the film that had been put somewhere. He'd seen it, and then I eventually saw it because he uploaded it to an online thing that I could see. So we could tell it wasn't what we had put together. So Bill spent a lot of time trying to restore to what it was before we had turned it over to other people. And we got it somewhat close to what it had been before. And then he uploaded the film and I had to download the film to a different drive-in computer. And ultimately we had to use French computers to be able to play the film. The other thing that was super upsetting for me, and I didn't understand at the time.
I didn't know there was such a thing as French computers. Is that a...
Well,
Microsoft.
I don't really completely understand, but when we got a French flash drive, that worked. And when we used people's computers that live in France, those worked.
They're just still prejudiced against Americans. Is that
I have no. They have a different. I mean, their systems, their electronic stuff is different.
Okay.
So you have to
kind of like their
master
outlets.
things.
They
like
run
their
on
outlets.
50 hertz electricity. We run on 60, so that can cause issues.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
Well, and you know how DVDs they have to be recorded in PAL.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just weird, funky things that I didn't understand that I think may be at the bottom of why we were having incompatibilities. And you have to remember, I had no technical people with me. I have no technical people in France. My technical people didn't come. So I was just by myself. And so I really had no choice, but to figure something out. So we ended up doing the first screening with my co-producer Michelle Coupé, her computer, and we had downloaded the film from online and then put it on her computer, and that's how we showed it. But it looked awful, and it sounded awful.
Okay.
And I was devastated. I was like, I cannot believe I have to show this. It was terrible. And so I found out much later that it did have to do with everything, like the projector, the screen we were showing it on, the sound system, the way the room was treated. It's a very old auditorium. They only play one video on a loop. It's very one time.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, you know what it's supposed to look like. No one else has any idea what it's supposed to look like.
Bill knew
okay,
what it
all
was
right. But I mean, I'm
supposed
talking about in France.
True.
So what was the response after the first showing?
Right. So we get there. Of course, I have to let all of that go. I know nobody else really knows. And everybody is so excited. So I really keep stuff close to the vest. I don't really go out there and air our dirty laundry, right? And my husband's there. My husband had brought two really close friends that he was excited to share the film with. A lot of our cast members were there. Everybody was just so super excited to be there. So that helped, right? And this is before the D-Day week begins. So we're still capitalizing on people's excitement that this anniversary is coming. And after that first screening was over, I mean, I don't know if there was a dry eye in the room.
Wow.
It really touched people. I think there were people in the audience who were surprised maybe they weren't in the film. There were people that were surprised they were so much a part of the film. There were strong reactions about the way we chose to tell the story, and some agreed, some didn't agree. But for the most part, everybody loved the film.
So people came up to you and said, I disagree with how the film or the story was told?
Not in so many words, but for example, this I found to be so fascinatingly funny. The French people predominantly were the ones that watched this film all the way through. It was predominantly French people. For the most part, the French people, their responses to me were, it's too much French. You need to cut out this person and this person. There's too many French things here. Like, they wanted more of the Americans. So roughly the first hour of the film covers, it covers my journey. This is how the film started. Then it talks about meeting these different people that were survivors of the occupation, and so I interview them. So the first 3 acts are me talking to these French people and finding out what happened on D-Day, the euphoria that they felt in the beginning when they first were liberated, the sadness and the awful, terrible things that happened at the hands of the Allied bombings and things like that. And then we began to talk about how the relationship developed between the French Normans and the Americans. And so then we began talking about that with the children, because that's where the relationships began, and then with the older people. So that's the first 3 acts, or the first hour of the film. The second hour takes us into the celebrations and how those relationships developed over the years and how they began these ceremonies and what the relationship looks like now. And that's largely has to deal with the veterans. And we talk about all these different veterans and the relationships they built with the French people. We interview American veterans. We interview modern day soldiers. And so it's the American part.
Okay.
And of course, the French people wanted more of that.
I see. Well, let's do this. So you're in France. You had your first screening, not a dry eye. People loved it. People giving you feedback, of course, right? On the next podcast, because you're in France for how long?
A month.
A month. So you've only had one screening, and now you've got probably another good 3 weeks ahead of you.
Yeah.
3 or 4 weeks. So let's hear about that on the next podcast.
Sounds great.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to Documentary First, where we believe everyone has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it.
Bye, everybody.